World War II wasn't just fought on the front lines, it was also fought in kitchens, cellars, and hidden gardens across Europe and Asia. Civilians under siege, blockade, or occupation had to invent ways to survive when food disappeared. What they came up with was often ingenious and, honestly, kinda horrifying. These weren't the recipes your grandmother proudly passed down. They were born of desperation, fear, and an empty pantry. So here are 8 dark, real food hacks civilians used during World War II that even hardened soldiers couldn't stomach. When grain was impossible to find, civilians in places like Finland, Russia, and parts of Germany turned to birch trees. The inner layer of bark, called cambium, was dried, ground into powder, and mixed with whatever flour scraps could be found. The result was a gray, bitter bark bread that filled bellies but honestly offered almost no nutrition. Soldiers passing through some of these villages were stunned to see people literally eating trees. For many it was bark bread, or starvation. In Finland's worst famine years during the war, this grim recipe became heartbreakingly common, symbolizing survival through sheer willpower. Coffee was a luxury long gone by 1942. Civilians improvised, creating black brews from roasted barley, acorns, or even ground-up beetroots. In occupied France and Germany, ersatz coffee became the norm, boiled, burnt, and super bitter. Some even used roasted dandelion roots or sawdust to imitate the smell and color of real coffee. It was so vile that Allied soldiers joked that one sip of it could kill morale faster than a bombing raid. Yet for many, that cup of fake coffee was a moment of psychological comfort in a world where normal life had vanished. Protein was the hardest thing to come by in bombed-out cities like London, Paris, and Warsaw. Civilians trapped in sieges learned quickly that rats, pigeons, and stray cats were, honestly, the only meat left. During the siege of Leningrad, families caught rats in traps, cleaned them with boiling water, and stewed them with potato peelings. In Paris, pigeons were roasted openly in courtyards, sometimes sold as roof chicken. Soldiers returning from the front lines were horrified to find their families eating vermin, but those same dishes kept thousands alive when supplies vanished completely. During severe famine, especially in Eastern Europe, some civilians discovered that ground animal bones, collected from butcher scraps or even old burial pits, could be pulverized into a gray flour substitute. It was mixed with a little water or leftover broth to create a gritty, chalk-like paste that offered trace minerals and calcium, but honestly, it shredded the stomach. German doctors warned against it, but for civilians in starvation zones, it was the last line of defense before death. Soldiers hearing about bone bread often dismissed it as propaganda, until they saw it themselves. Yes, wallpaper. During the siege of Leningrad, some families discovered that old wallpaper glue was made with potato starch. Desperate, they would peel wallpaper from the walls, scrape off the paste, and boil it into a thick soup. Some even added sawdust for texture. It was revolting and dangerous. Many died from chemical poisoning, but when the temperature dropped below -30 degrees Celsius and the blockade stretched on for years, people would eat anything that looked remotely edible. Allied prisoners, who later heard the stories, called it the soup of madness. In Germany and Poland, as wheat and rye disappeared, scientists and bakers were ordered to create substitute breads. Some of these contained cellulose, basically sawdust. Factories produced loaves that looked like real bread but were so dry and fibrous that they could barely be chewed. Civilians joked that it's good for cleaning your teeth while you lose them. Allied soldiers who tried captured rations containing cellulose bread, called it wood in disguise. It technically provided fiber, but no one who ate it ever forgot the taste, or the splinters. When cooking oils became impossible to find, some civilians resorted to boiling animal fat from carcasses, or even processing hair from barbershops, to extract grease. In Japan and parts of occupied Europe, these makeshift oils were used to fry vegetables or stretch stews. The smell was honestly atrocious, but it was the only way to keep food from sticking to pans or to add desperately needed calories. Soldiers later described entering bombed kitchens where pots still smelled of burned hare soup. Perhaps the most haunting food hack of all came during long sieges, when people literally ate non-food items, candle wax, boiled shoe leather, belts, and book bindings, since they were made from animal glue, became mealtime staples. Civilians would simmer old leather for hours just to soften it, scraping off mold and, any polishing chemicals. Candle wax was melted and mixed with water to kind of mimic broth. It offered no nutrition, only the illusion of eating. Survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto and Leningrad blockade later said that the hardest part wasn't hunger, it was pretending that the wax or leather meal was food. What's shocking about these World War II food hacks isn't just their creativity, it's what they say about human endurance. In a world stripped of comfort and dignity, civilians turned to bark, glue, and even hair, not because they wanted to, but because they just refused to die quietly. Soldiers who heard these stories often said the home front's suffering was worse than anything they saw in combat. These dark recipes remind us that survival is not always heroic. It's desperate, resourceful, and, honestly, deeply human. If you found this story fascinating, go ahead and subscribe to Strange History for more unbelievable tales from the forgotten corners of war. Share this video with someone who thinks they've heard it all, because, honestly, history's strangest meals tell the hardest truths.